to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the October 11th, 2019 Village of Woodbury Planning Board meeting. Has the board had a chance to read the minutes from the October 2nd meeting?
Yes.
Yes, I just have one comment on the last page where it talks about deemed not possible due to space for the ramp. I don't recall us saying that was the case. Oh, I'm sorry. There you go. On the last page, upper, I'll say like we're
8 lines down.
thank you. 8 lines down, where it says, site engineer looked into the possibility of reasonable slope, and it was deemed not possible due to space. I don't think we deemed not possible due to space. Okay. All right, as long as we don't believe it's not doable, that's fine. Okay. So we that's all right, leave it?
Yeah, it's just what he said.
Oh, it's just, he deemed. I like that idea. Whatever it is to make it clearer, to make it sound like it's not possible. Does that make sense?
But you didn't say that it wasn't not possible. He said it was possible. And you had said the opposite.
He said that you could do it?
He said it could not be done because there was not enough space.
Right, but that's what I think you were getting to, that there wasn't enough space. Who said that? Who deemed that?
Who deemed that there wasn't enough
And
space?
that was their engineer.
Oh, I don't know what his name was. He never said it at the meeting. He just said their engineer, their site engineer. Do you
Yes.
have his name? I can put his name in there.
No, I don't think we need it. You
No.
can just, I think you can just say, he deemed it.
Just putting the word deemed means that it was his interpretation. That's all. I think that's the only change.
But then it says that Lindsay agreed that all the straight slopes could not be done in that location and would not meet the regulations. See, that's where you get pulled into it.
Okay, and
Want me to show you where it is?
yeah, I'm not sure which one. Is it the Catskill High Rail or what is this?
It's the,
Central Valley?
Oh, okay. This is Central Valley Property Management?
yeah. When did I receive the minutes? No, I got it in the cabinet today. She may have emailed it to me.
They were emailed, and they were emailed a little while.
Yeah.
Yeah, a day after the meeting, in fact.
Yeah, I think it was very quick, right. This says that engineer Lindsay agreed that a straight, I think a stoop, could not be done at this location as it would not meet regulations. That doesn't mean that you couldn't do a ramp. What I said was a straight stoop, and what that meant is that the distance between the sidewalk and the building was short. They had a number of steps. ADA only allows a certain grade, and that I would have agreed to. If
Okay.
I think that it's correct. The minutes are correct.
Okay.
A straight stoop could not be done at this location, does not meet regulations. And by regulations, I meant ADA.
But does that limit our ability to comment on the design?
No, that simply meant that you couldn't go in straight from the sidewalk up.
Okay. That's fair.
And you could do a switchback. You've seen those ramps. It might not be as attractive. That's what you'd have to consider.
Right, well, there could be multiple ways to do it.
There's a number of ways to handle it.
And I
Yep.
don't know if it's given the right time to study it yet. That's one.
Any other questions? So are we leaving them now?
That's
We're leaving them now.
Well, we're leaving my comment, I think, is alone is okay. And the other one, you inserted the word deemed, I think. He deemed?
I
Okay.
didn't say deemed already.
I just think it's stretched out this meeting, guys. I know you want it to be quick.
It's okay. Yeah, well, learned the hard way there.
Stretch.
And we got him on the 8th. Maria emailed him on the 8th.
So, that's
Instead of
very
it.
word,
Where are we at? I don't have it in front of me either, so.
okay. So it says the site engineer looked into the possibility of a reasonable slope and he deemed.
Instead of it, he.
Yeah, well, you have to change a little bit. He deemed it not possible due to space.
Thank you.
Okay. Good now?
The lesson is that I'll look at them sooner. That's.
You good, Des? Okay. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes as modified?
I make that motion.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. On to the regular agenda. CAD Signs Corp. Aldi review application received for ARB approval for proposed sign panel to include both Aldi and Kohl's on the Woodbury Center monument sign. Said property is located at Center Drive, Route 32, and is known as the Village of Woodbury Tax Maps, is Section 225, Block 2, Lot 1.12. Good evening, sir. You could just state your name for the record, please.
Of course. Good evening, John Ekman with Aldi, Real Estate Director. I've been here before working with the building and signage on our building, but we are back in front of you today to discuss the pylon sign. We are asking for the 5 colors that are part of the Aldi prototypical logo to be approved, as well as the signage panel split with Kohl's. So a little bit of background on the signage panel split. That is a request of Kohl's. That's as much as they were willing to give us of the panel split, 65-35%. And I think that's probably the maximum amount that Aldi could get out of it to allow Kohl's to still fit in there appropriately as well. So any comments, questions about it? I am comfortable to answer those.
First, Mr. Dennis?
Sure. Did you receive a copy of our comments? Because we sent them to Tanya, is it?
I didn't receive any directly from you guys.
Okay. I just want to know. I'll go through them, but
Yep.
As you know, this sign has been before the board on a number of occasions, and I'm not going to go back. I recited the history in here of 2008 when it was submitted, and then again as it was revised in 2015. And you have the signs that are shown on those 2 pylons. And I'm going to cut to the chase here for the board. The fundamental question that we have here is the balance that the board has to have between having a sign that is informative to the public and it lets them know what's on the site, as opposed to a sign that's too wordy and creates confusion for drivers. That's the issue that previous boards have wrestled with when this sign came on a number of different occasions. The board back in 2009, in its approval, had a specific condition that said, in part, that they believe the addition of any future panels or the placement of more than 7 tenant signs into the Woodbury Center sign or smaller lettering that would unnecessarily require extended visual distraction by passing drivers to read the text will be detrimental to the welfare and safety of the public. For that reason, the board resolves that the Woodbury Center sign shall never contain more than 7 panels or advertising more than 7 tenants. When you reviewed this in 2018, you were a different board. You considered the facts before you. They asked for an additional panel. You considered that. They were going to reduce the Woodbury Center font at the top and put another panel in. You considered that, and you allowed it. And you had a very similar condition that cited pretty much the same things. And it said that the maximum number would be 8 tenants, 8 tenant signs. and for the very same reasons. And you can read the section that I gave you, and I gave you the entire section that the board put in the resolution. That is a condition that you imposed. It's within your authority to change it if you wish, if you think it's appropriate to do so. And so that's the question that's before you now. They're not proposing more panel signs, but they are proposing another name on the existing sign area. And that is the principal question that's before the board, whether at some point, incrementally, when you add one additional sign and one additional sign, it becomes too busy and too wordy and there's too much on it. And that's the question that's before the board, whether you believe that this is appropriate. Now, Aldi's is a large sign, and quite frankly, Aldi's and Kohl's are probably the two anchor signs. And normally, what you might have is, you know, a sign and have one or two anchor signs listed on the sign panel. Not exactly what's here, but this is what you have, and this is what's been approved. So that's the fundamental question. The other two things are the operational details. Just should confirm with the center that they're not going to change the operational details on this. Same lighting, same hours of operation, that sort of thing. The ARB, the ARB allows up to 4 colors on any one sign. This one has 5 colors. Okay. What you did last time was, based on advice of counsel, I think, too, you determined that the sign could be approved, but that they would have to go to the building department for approval. And let's see, the approval at that time said it did not authorize any sign be erected and referred the applicant to the building department for a sign permit for the wall sign, to let that be resolved with Gary and his interpretation on the colors. Because sometimes they overlap, and it would be how he's interpreted every sign that's come before him. Many applications go strictly to him. So you might want to talk to Rick about whether that would be appropriate in this particular instance to do it that way. Other than that, it would have to go to the ZBA. And that's all I have.
Dennis, the 2018, when we made that modification, that was the Ultra sign?
You put another panel in there. I mean, the Aldi's?
No, it was Ulta. It was the Ulta panel.
Okay.
Because that was a condition, that was a condition of the,
Well, they originally came in with changes to both pylon signs. They deleted the one on Route 6, and that did not change. They changed the one on Route 3217. You allowed an additional panel on that sign, which is what they're showing now as the before picture. And now they're saying they want to take the top sign, which is Kohl's, slice it 2/3 and 1/3, 2/3 being Kohl's sign, and the other 1/3 being Aldi's.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
now it's one panel with 2 signs. Now, is it technically 6 colors now, because it's all on the same panel? I mean, it's something we're gonna have to send to Gary for interpret, because I believe that's what happened last time. It was a ZBA referral because of the 5 colors.
You didn't refer it to the ZBA. You sent it to Gary.
But you
And
ended up in front of the ZBA, didn't you?
I did.
You did.
I think
Well,
that's
maybe
because,
yeah.
that's because Gary, I think, determined that he was not going to do it, that it's the ZBA's job to do it. And I think it, apropos to what Dennis was saying before, there may be times when it makes sense for Gary to interpret whether or not we have 4 colors or 3 colors. Maybe it's 2 just varying shades of red,
Right.
and Gary may determine that that's just red and not actually 2 colors. It's up to either you or Gary or the ZBA to determine whether or not these are 4 or 5 distinct colors on the Aldi sign, as well as your question, Chris, as to whether or not if you're having it on the same panel, that you have to now count the colors with Kohl's.
Right.
So I think, in addition to I agree with Dennis, they're not having more than 8 panels, so that's not different than your prior resolution. But clearly they have more than 8 tenants being advertised, which is contrary to your prior condition. Also, it says that it can't contain advertising text at smaller lettering.
Right.
And the question is, is Kohl's now smaller lettering than it was before? Or are you going to say that it's still larger than the smallest lettering on there, which is probably Eileen Fisher? And Aldi probably is about the same size and certainly clearer than, because of the boldness of Eileen Fisher. So the real issue that you have is, does this conform to the prior approval condition? Now, that's a condition that this board put there. It's not a condition in the code. The four colors is a condition in the code. But the issue on no more than 8 with respect to panels and tenants, and as well as the smaller font, those are conditions this board put on, and this board can change those, just like it changed it when it went from 7 to 8. One of the reasons you allowed the 8 was because something else shrunk, and you thought overall it was better for the traveling public from a point of view of reading things, that you could live with the 8 rather than the 7 because of the changes that were made. And you may decide to make that same kind of analysis, that given what they're doing, it's no worse than it was before with respect to confusion and traveling public. But there was a real health and safety issue that was specifically set forth in this condition as the reason for the condition. And so it's up to this board whether you want to uphold that prior one and think that this is not in conformance. And if so, just so that you know the process and the applicant would know the process, this was a condition of the planning board, so let's just assume, just so I can play out different paths here. Let's say you say, no, this isn't acceptable because it's more than 8 tenants, and therefore we're not going to approve this ARB. The applicant can appeal your denial to the ZBA, and then the ZBA will determine what to do. It's not clear in the code whether or not the ZBA reviews it anew, just as if they were the planning board, or whether they determine your denial was arbitrary and capricious. There's no standard set forth. But if you do deny it based upon the prior condition and you want to stick with that condition, then the applicant would need to go to the ZBA. If you decide to change that condition, you have the ability to do that because it was this board that imposed the condition, and this board can thereafter change the condition or eliminate it. That's up to you.
Well, I'm not in favor of going against the special condition of 2018. We studied that carefully, and we thought that more things would be visual distractions, would be dangerous. Also, it doesn't look visually appealing to me. Maybe one of your other tenants will move out someday and you can put them there, but I'm not in favor of changing the resolution of 2018.
I'm not in favor of changing the resolution either, because it feels like if we made a condition and then we change a condition, what's to say that it just keep going down that same road? Oh, it's okay. So I agree. I support the previous condition. That's basically what it's at.
If I could,
One other procedural issue, just so that you know, that a public hearing is required for this. We also have to set seeker, but seeker you can determine as a type 2 action. There's no GML 239 required. So as far as process goes, I think it's appropriate for the board. You can discuss it tonight and consider it, but I think you need to be go through the process before you can actually make a determination. Is not required.
if I could comment, in 2018, the Kohl's space was all one. And so understand the concern, could this keep going? Understand the concern that if every panel gets split, then it's just a complete hodgepodge and mess. Agree. However, the real estate in that center is different today than it was in 2018, and Kohl's is no longer as large as they were. And Aldi is a portion of what used to be all of Kohl's. So Customers will, when viewing the sign, look at the Aldi panel with the Kohl's panel and say, well, yeah, those two kind of are together. I'm going to go, whenever I turn into the center, I'm going to track towards where Kohl's is to find Aldi, and then all of a sudden they come upon our facade. I also think Aldi being newer to this area, it merits having roadside signage, albeit smaller than what I would want, but the best that I can get under the lease. Some roadside signage than none. There's a vast amount of mature trees in that parking lot, and the visibility of the facades, especially in the rear of that center from the road, are minimal. And so customers who are looking for Aldi, trying to find us, will better to have something on the road than nothing to find out where I need to make a left or a right, versus trying to barely see the facade down past the trees and then they see it at the last second, make a quick lane adjustment, and that might be worse than having some element of roadside signage. That's my argument. That's kind of the best that I can throw at you. Understand the concerns, understand the 2018 agreements put in place, but I think Kohl's is different than it was in 2018, and I think that should be viewed as part of this. Also, the Kohl's panel is larger and the largest on the pylon, so splitting that panel up and giving, I guess, precedence to allowing only that panel to be split as the largest panel on the sign might be merit as well, but obviously your decision.
Right now, I understand the businesses need to advertise, the gentleman was saying with the new presence in their community. But I'm also, I was here for 2018, and I remember the conversations that went into that deliberation. And one of the things the board was trying to avoid was turning these into these massive, colorful, because you're right, it gets to a point where, there's just too much on it, and you can't read it. You're doing 45, 50 miles an hour, you just can't read what's there. So with that said, I really think right now, I'd like to we'll wait to hear from the public before I really have anything further to say, see what the public thinks about it. It is their right, and it's the process. So, you think we can get it in on the 6th, Dennis? What do you think with your call?
No, you can get in. I mean, just a little bit longer meeting.
Are you coffee that night? Mm-hmm. All right, so I will offer a motion to schedule a public hearing for the November 6th meeting. Do I have a second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
And if you would just note for the record. Yeah, okay.
And then a motion to type this as a type 2 action on SECA. I'll make the motion.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, then we'll see you on the November 6th. Thank you. We don't have any for, Rick, there's nobody for Genco. Can we do the?
Yes.
Next item on the agenda is Genco extension request for approval of a previously approved site plan, special permit and ARB of a proposed 7-unit residential complex on vacant property, which is expired. Said property is located in the HB zoning district at 6 and 8 Falkirk Avenue in Central Valley, is known as the village of Woodbury Tax Map, sections 231, block 3, lot 6.1 and 6.2. This, I believe, we're just waiting for them to get their engineer's seal on the plans, right?
Correct. They received approval from you, which was signed and filed with the clerk on August 15th. They had 60 days in which to submit those plans. That would have expired on October 14th, or did expire on October 14th. However, they submitted a letter to you, which is what the code requires. They asked for an extension. I received a phone call from their engineer the other day discussing with me the changes that are necessary, and I think the only changes are the date on the plan has to change, and they need to submit signed and sealed plans. So that's what they're in the process of doing, so I believe an extension would be reasonable. They asked for a 30-day extension, but knowing how time goes and things happen, Rick, 60 days, would that be? Yeah. I'd recommend that you extend it for 60 days unless there's some particular problem with it. It's something that the board approved. So if you can extend it for 60 days, then they can have time to submit the necessary paperwork.
And just for your calculation, I know that you're dying to figure out the 60 days, is that would bring you to December 15th, which is not a meeting night. So typical with your practice, you do it to the meeting before it would otherwise extend or otherwise end. So under that, your closest meeting date prior to the 60 days is December 4th, 2019. So,
We'll just extend it to, I'll make a motion to extend the site plan approval to 12/4 for Genco.
I second it.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, one more. I've got to schedule a public hearing for
Schlesinger, just to give you a rundown, you previously authorized the public hearing be scheduled. However, you also required that the applicant submit revised plans by a date certain. And they did not do that to get listed on your, I think it was the October 16th meeting. Therefore, we couldn't set it for that meeting. If we have them come back in just to set a public hearing date, then they'd have to come in the next meeting. So they've submitted plans, and so what you can do is schedule the hearing now you can either do it the next meeting or the meeting after, whichever you prefer. We are getting a little, well, we could do it for the next meeting if you want. There'll be a number of public hearings, that's all. Especially since you just set this one for that. You might not be doing them a favor to list it. I think perhaps we list it on the next one, or you can authorize it at least now. And if it's not for the next meeting, this is Schlesinger. And yes, November 20th.
I'll make a motion that we schedule a public hearing for Schlesinger for the November 20th meeting. Have a second?
Don't they need the public? Don't they need to tell the public? How do they tell the public?
We notify them. The building department notifies the public of the public hearing. Of the public hearing.
You're not obligated to. And my understanding is I think you put it on, I guess, Channel 22? It used to be on Channel 22. You don't do it anymore? Okay. But Maria does send out notices to the adjacent property owners.
I second it then.
Any questions?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
20th, yes.
Anything else you want to talk about?
I thought the applicants normally tell the public, they mail it to the public.
No, we're one of the boards, the building departments that take care of it for the applicant.
Wasn't that nice of us? I make a motion to close the meeting?
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Nobody wants